Hello, Northern Michigan. My name is Dakota Baker, Director for the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance. We exist to advocate for the growth and prosperity of our region. Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula are so important. And one of the big conversations we've been hearing a lot about is data centers. It's a loud conversation. It's a controversial conversation. And with the growing use of AI, it's really a conversation that's not going away. So we decided to put this event together today to gather local elected officials, township supervisors, county commissioners, planning board members, to talk to experts, to answer questions and concerns about some of the most pressing things we're hearing in our communities. Please enjoy. All right, everybody. Good morning, Northern Michigan. Thank you all for taking the time to be here with us today. My name is Dakota Baker, and I have the honor and the privilege to serve you all as the Director for your Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance. For those of you who don't know or may not be aware, the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance is an alliance of partners from across the northern, lower, and upper peninsulas of our great state. Our objective, being chambers of commerce and economic development organizations, is to enhance and empower local business, to elevate the communities we serve and bring economic competitiveness to our region. One large topic that we've heard, especially in this region, is why we're all here today. That's data centers. Data centers have become a topic that is both large, confusing to many, and frankly very controversial in our region. And so we thought it would be in the best interest of Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula to convene a gathering of local elected officials and experts in many of the key policy areas or key impact areas that data center proposals might have as these projects are considered in the various communities across the state of Michigan. We've heard a lot from different communities across the state, from what does the environmental impact look like? What are we going to have for noise pollution? What are we going to have for energy usage, cost of energy? What is that going to do to our grid? Right, and so we've brought several people here, and we've got a township supervisor from a place that has a data center in it to speak to you sort of at the same page as well. So you can ask questions. I am going to ask everybody, please, to remain respectful. It is not the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance's responsibility, nor is our right, to tell any of you as local leaders how you should manage your communities. That is your decision. We just want to bring you the information so that you can go home and make that best decision for the communities that you serve. So everybody here today, everyone that will be speaking, has come here to share their experience, to share their knowledge with you, to share the insights they have about many of the different elements of these controversial projects. So as you're asking questions, as you're listening today and engaging, please remember to show everybody here your respect. They're here to give you information so you can make the best decisions. We have this event is put together for local elected officials. So when we get to the Q&A portion after the different presentations you'll see up here today, please raise your hand. We'll have somebody run a mic out to you so that everyone can hear your question, and state just your name and what community you represent so we know who you are, and we can let our local elected officials ask those important questions today. I do want to thank several of our sponsors that have made this possible today. Number one, this is a fantastic room we're all in, very representative of Northern Michigan, I would say. So let's all give a warm round of applause for Jay's Sporting Goods, please, for hosting us. Thank you, Jay's. I'd also like to thank our media host today, 7 and 4 Up North Live. They are recording this event for us so that we can put all of this out publicly on the Alliance website to be shared with all of you, with your constituents, and everybody else that might have questions. This is a public event, so everyone will get to hear and see what we're talking about today. So thank you, Up North Live, for providing that for our community as well. And of course, last but not least, I want to give a shout out to one of our 21 partners, the Gaylord Area Chamber of Commerce, for being our co-host today. No way this could have happened without their help, so if everyone would please give them a round of applause also. All right, everybody. Well, we have a lot to cover today. We've got 2 hours of time where we're going to really get into a lot of these big issues, so we're going to dive right in. I'd like to welcome my good friend, Jon Willow, the Executive Director for the Benzie Area Chamber of Commerce, to lead us in a level-setting conversation about data centers that we're calling Data Centers 101. Thanks, Jon.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jon Willow, and in addition to being the Executive Director of the Benzie Area Chamber of Commerce, I am the co-founder of the Community Broadband Action Network, and I am Michigan State University's 2025 REI Innovation Fellow studying the effect of AI and advanced technologies on communities like ours. So I was so excited when Dakota and the NMCA asked me if I would do a level set today. So what we're doing today is we're just making sure that we all have shared vocabulary for the conversation. So we'll take care of that in the next 15 minutes. And as soon as I figure out how to use this, oh, that's great. I think I turned it off. Oh, thank you. Is this the?
Side to side.
Okay. All right, there we are. So today we'll cover our agenda today. I'll cover what a data center is, why it matters, and a bunch of other stuff. Some of these slides are dense, and I'm not going to read them, but I wanted that information accessible to everyone. So if there's something that we touch on that we don't go into depth about because we don't have a lot of time, my slide deck will be available as a PDF on the NMCA website after the event. So we've got a lot going, so let's start with the big question. What is a data center? And a data center is just a specialized housing facility that where thousands of servers store, process, and transmit digital information. I think we knew that, but that is where the fork in the road sort of breaks. A data center is part of the physical backbone of the internet, if that makes sense to you. It is information travels, it stops places, it's generated places, it disseminates out. Data center. So when you file taxes online, when you stream video, when you access any cloud service, your request is traveling to a data center. It could be in Georgia, it could be in Texas, it could be right here in Michigan. And I'm still not understanding how to move this. Okay, so there are three forces driving the big growth now, and that's cloud computing. Even at the local level now, you probably will have seen that maybe if any of you around 20 years ago, 15 years ago, a lot of your data was stored on physical servers that were maintained by your locality. That is mostly no longer the case. Local governments definitely took advantage of the cost savings and staffing savings that came from putting everything we have into the cloud, as did pretty much every Fortune 500 company, except, interestingly, IBM, who keeps all of their stuff physically on site. Anyway, so cloud computing is a huge one. Artificial intelligence, do we really even need to go there? We know that we hear nightmares about millions of tokens and burning up gallons of water. That's all real. And digital transformation, and we think about that as maybe something that affects other people, but it's remote work, it's video streaming, it's smart devices, it's e-government services. So when we think about the demand for data consumption, it's only going to grow, and there has to be a place for all of that information to live and move. It's big business too. Maybe one of the biggest booms we've ever had, may eclipse every boom we've ever had in the end. $425 billion in U.S. data spending, U.S. data center spending just in 2025. Almost $500 billion. You can see these numbers are huge. How it impacts Michigan? Well, we've got $30 billion plus of our own investment across 34 known projects. We're so far set to generate 16 gigawatts of capacity. We're going to use over 4,000 acres of land to get that. So you can see the implications are massive whenever they go into a community. But here's an important distinction. Not all data centers are the same. So when you're thinking about this for your community in particular, when you hear the word data center, realize that you need to make sure you fully understand what the ask is. So when we think about data centers right now, we think a lot about these hyperscale data centers. Those are the boogies for a lot of us, especially those of us without super built-out grids, right? They are 100,000 to 10 million square feet. And they generate between 50 and 500 megawatts of energy, or they draw between 50 and 500 megawatts of energy. A co-location data center is basically what we've always known to be a server farm. That's a building where different companies, different entities store their own servers, they're remotely managed, and the information travels over the cloud. Those are kind of mid-size. They can be about 10,000 square feet to 500,000 square feet. That's still really big, but not as big as a hyperscale center. And then the third one, and I'm not advocating, but smaller communities have shown the most interest in this one because an edge or micro center can be as small as a single shipping container, but it can still provide. And just a heads up, this is also, when you hear about this and somebody wants to build one of these, make sure they're not Bitcoin mining because the impact on your power grid will be unforetold. So, or if they are, make sure you understand the implications and that you are making sure that they cover their overage costs. But one of the things that an edge or micro center might do for a community is you could have your own that belongs to nobody but you. You often find them near cell towers because it enables smart city infrastructure, but it's also a great way to run all of your own local IT. I mean, a great way. It's a convenient way. It may not be a great way, depending on what the needs are. But just to show the variance, a data center is a lot of things. There are 4 core requirements for every data center. I think we've all know what the 4 things we're most afraid of are. And that includes us in Benzie County, by the way. So power, land, water, and fiber optic connectivity. Those are the 4 big things. We're going to discuss those at length today. And this is where we get into the economic footprint in some of these dense slides. Michigan has passed legislation that creates both tax incentives and certain requirements from data center builders. You can look at all of these in my PowerPoint slide or presentation if you choose to download it. But the basic high level is that the Michigan law requires that for a data center to be built, which is interesting when you think about an edge or micro center, which needs no one. That has to create at least 30 full-time jobs at 150% of the local median wage. If they want sales and use tax exemption, we need the local property taxes do stay in place. It's just sales and use tax that goes away. There is a sales and use tax exemption, though, that eliminates the 6% sales tax on equipment and some other detail-y caveats. So I'm just telling you that this is a drill down so that if you are approached by a data center, you find yourself actively negotiating, remember that there are questions beyond the questions beyond the questions. So just because there's an exemption doesn't mean that, right? So just because the tax stays in place doesn't mean it really stays in place. And these are taxes we want because these are taxes that data center builders are providing to pay their own bills, and for us to use to operate our communities. So Michigan-specific factors for community costs. For the Michigan State Code, developers pay for the grid update, not the community. Where they're required to sign long-term contracts. They have to report their water use, but everything around water is very much a moving target right now, so just watch the water space. The community benefit agreements are possibly what is sold to communities as being the most valuable piece of this or the most direct piece, but they're not required to exist. So if you find yourself in a situation where a data center developer is making headway, make sure that all of those community benefit agreements are written into full contracts, and that the contract benefits and favors the community, because those are legally binding. It's just not required that they offer them. Finally, there's a conditional 90% clean energy requirement, but it only comes in. It only comes into play if a data center does claim the sales and use tax exemption. I don't want to get too far in the weeds today, but this, to me, seems like it's tied to this, right? So we come out legislatively and say, oh look, we're requiring 90% clean energy, but that's only if people take advantage of the sales and use tax exemption. And I bet you that I bet you it costs more to build a 90% clean energy facility than it does to pay the sales and use tax. I think that's just the bottom line. So again, questions within questions within questions, and you'll need to make sure that you ask them. Yeah. So here's more of the legislative climate. A lot is going on. I am not going to read this slide, but I basically covered the general tenets in the last slide. However, this is a current status. It won't stay current for more than a few months or less, but it's important now. And if you want to download the slides, then you can get yourself up to speed on that. There are a lot of demands on a community when a data center comes. I think anyone who's been impacted by that knows that firsthand, and anyone who hasn't been impacted by it yet is concerned that it would be the case. So we've got power grid strain, infrastructure costs, incentive negotiation. This is actually a bigger piece of contention than you might anticipate at first. You may think that you're going to have all of your trouble here, but the utility providers in your region, they already know what their walking orders are. And infrastructure costs, there are mechanisms for those, and there will be complaints, but when you get into incentive negotiation and what does my community get out of it, that's where people start to get, there's a lot of diverse opinions. Long-term consideration, this is another thing, I don't know if people are talking about this enough, but as quickly as technology and and especially energy transmission backbone doesn't necessarily go obsolete, but the rate at which we are consuming data and consuming energy and water and all the things around it, this is going to require a rapid evolution of the technology. And so when we build a data center today, how long is it relevant? And so maybe something to think about is, what kind of data center are you building? How do we know it's future-proof? It's not, we can't make it 100% future-proof, but are we building on technologies that are just at the edge of currency, or is that data center developer looking forward to how it will be impacting your community in 10 years? And then, of course, zoning and land use, which all zoning is local. That's I think what township and local officials can do to be ready for this is to really look at your zoning ordinances and to see where those vulnerabilities or those opportunities might be. But it's not a bad time for a zoning review. All right. Now here's some questions that you might want to ask if a data center developer comes to your town. And again, I won't spend too much time on this. You can download the slides. But like we talked about, what kind of facility is this? Who is the end user? What are the power and water requirements? And who pays not for the base infrastructure, which is the power company, but the upgrades that will be required along the way and the maintenance? How many permanent jobs will be created and at what wage levels? One of the ways that we can recalibrate our own thinking to help us understand how data centers work a little bit better is that they're not intended to create a factory level of permanent jobs. So when you think about like that construction boom money that comes in, that is a blessing and a headache for communities because you have rapid expansion. I have a friend in Cedar Rapids where they're building a data center, and she is on the process of moving to Oregon. Her house, when she put it on the market or when she was considering what her rental rate for the home was going to be, 4 months ago, she was setting it at $2,500. She just rented it to a corporate couple who are here who are in Cedar Rapids for the construction of the data center for $4,500 a month, because that's what happens to your tax base or your local revenue in the short term. But it is a cliff. So when you plan for it, so if it comes to your town and you plan for it, it behooves you to help your local businesses, to help your local landlords, your local purveyors of hospitality of all kinds, even banking services, even your schools. Help them be ready for that temporary expanded capacity. But what does happen when the construction is over is that you have created a handful of family-sustaining jobs. Many jobs over, in the six-figure range. And I don't know about your communities, but in my community of Benzie County, 10 six-figure jobs would be significant. That would be meaningful for us. So I don't necessarily see that long-term job creation as a problem as long as we are pragmatic, we're aware of what it is, and we know specifically what the benefit to the community could be. What incentives are being requested, and what is the net fiscal impact? In Michigan, it's fairly well gridded out what the incentives are, but at a community level, those data center developers may negotiate for even more. So if they want more incentives, make sure that you're involving everyone in finance. Make sure that you are really thinking these through. Don't take anything that will hurt you in the end, because these can be community liabilities, and we all know stories. We can have a liability situation down the road similar to what happens when a factory closes, even though not as many people were working there. There's nothing to support the infrastructure that was built. There's nothing to support the schools that were expanded, etc. So what community benefit commitments are on the table? And now going back to what we talked about just a second ago, it's not mandated that a data center developer offer a community benefit agreement, but this is the spot where communities can recoup the most unrestricted benefit back into their own communities. And then what happens to the facility at the end of life? So who has decommissioning responsibility, environmental remediation, and property transfer terms? Who lives in a county that doesn't have a brownfield building or campus on it? Right. So that's looking into the future. And it's so, so important because we don't want to get saddled with that. So, to sum up, data centers are major infrastructure. We know that. Demand is accelerating rapidly. The 4 key inputs, power, land, water, and connectivity, will determine where facilities are built. So know your community's profile. A recent audit at our county revealed that we are not yet terrific candidates for a data center. Not that our county wants that, but when we are looking at, we did the audit just to see how soon we might have to address these fears, like how likely it was that we would be a candidate. And as it turns out, it's going to be a minute. We've got consumers putting in $25 million in improvements in our county, and that may change things, Eric. But right now, some people feel like they lost an opportunity, and other people feel safe. So know your own community profile. And economic benefits are real, but they require careful scrutiny. I think I've pounded on that for my whole presentation. So just numbers, 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 questions after questions after questions. And as we all know, officials who ask more informed questions are better to negotiate from a strong position, including for community benefits. So that's it for today. I don't think I have time for questions or anything. Nope. So thank you very much. If you want the deck, you're welcome to it.
The following panel is a panel with all of our utilities and infrastructure providers to address concerns about the cost of energy, the weight of data center projects on the grid, and how all of that sort of interplays with the communities in northern Michigan. Led by my friend Ashley Hutchins from the Gaylord Area Chamber of Commerce and my co-host today. Thank you, John, for setting that conversation, kind of getting us all on the same page here as we know what we're talking about with regard to these projects. So we're going to get right into our first segment today. I'd like to welcome my co-host this morning, Ashley Hutchins with the Gaylord Chamber up to moderate our first panel.
Thank you, Dakota. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Gaylord Area Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for being out today and just really coming to learn and educate and inform yourselves on data centers and all that we have today. And just remember, again, that this is a unbiased space, and we are just promoting education and growth here. So I get the honor and the privilege. Let me see if I can get my iPad open here. I get the honor and privilege this morning to talk a little bit with all of our energy and our providers in that realm. So I would like to welcome Zach Anderson, Chief Operating Officer of the Wolverine Power Cooperative, here on behalf of Michigan Electric Cooperative Association, to join us up here. I would also like to welcome Eric Gustad, with Community Affairs Manager for Consumers Energy, to join us as well. Michael Fleck, Director of Reliability and Regional Planning for ITC Holdings Corporation, and Daniel Mahoney, the Director of Policy and Regional Affairs for DTE, please. We do have a few questions. Gentlemen, just feel free to jump in wherever you feel comfortable answering, and can have some information for our attendees today. The first thing we want to talk about is, will existing residential and small business customers pay any higher cost because of data center related infrastructure? If not, what legally enforceable protections can guarantee against that? Jump right in wherever you're ready.
All right, well, I guess Consumers Energy will jump in because we're much of the energy provider in this area. So the first and easiest answer is no. Our residential customers will not pay any additional higher costs as a result of a data center coming in. The data center will pay for their use. They're responsible for any upgrades that we have to make to the infrastructure, whether that's a new data center, or not two data center, a new a substation, additional new poles, new transformers, all of the equipment associated with serving that data center will be borne by the data center themselves. So none of those costs will be transferred over to our residential customers for any reason. And there's a number of protections in place and guide rails for that. One of the guide rails is what John mentioned a little bit about, is some of the legislation that has been passed over the last year or two. Michigan 2020 of our data center legislation, that law explicitly bars data centers from shifting costs to our residential customers. And then we have, we negotiated with the MPSC, is the Michigan Large Load Tariff, which again, it enforces Consumers Energy to make sure we're not passing on any of those costs to our residential customers, and the MPSC has oversight on that through that tariff language. So there's a number of protections in place for that to make sure we are not passing on those costs to our residential customers.
Oh, please. No. Well, I mean, I just want to. You got the mic. Yes, fair enough. Right. So, absolutely correctly. Like zero opportunity for existing customers to pick up costs that are generated by a data center. And actually, what DT is finding in our service territory is the opposite. That data centers will cover the costs for infrastructure upgrades that we would have likely gone to our customers and had them pay for in the forthcoming years. So DT has two projects in our service territories, one in Saline Township with a company called Oracle and OpenAI, another one in Van Buren Township with Google. The OpenAI project has been approved by the Public Service Commission. The contracts that we filed with them to provide service have been approved by the Public Service contracts and bake in a lot of the protections that my colleague from Consumer has spoken to. So all of those things that would protect customers from absorbing any new costs are baked into the contracts that we have with those companies, right? Let me just throw out a couple numbers here so you can kind of understand the context of what I'm talking about. When the OpenAI project in Saline Township comes online, right, which will be towards the end of next year, DTE has forecasted a $300 million affordability benefit to our existing customers, meaning that as we continue to invest in the distribution system, right, to upgrade the poles, the wires, the transformers, all of those things that help make the distribution system more reliable, the revenue that we generate from serving OpenAI and Oracle and Saline will pay for those expenses instead of us having to go to our existing customers and recover them through rates. When the Google project, which is still going through the Public Service Commission's approval process, when that one eventually, hopefully, knock on wood, when those contracts get approved, there'll be additional affordability benefits to our customers. All told, between these two projects, we forecast about $9 billion of affordability benefit to our existing customers over the life of these contracts, which are approximately 20 years. So the concern about will data centers create new costs for our customers is really like a misperception. It will do the exact opposite. It will absorb costs that our customers would have otherwise had to cover as we continue to invest in our system.
Yeah, so adding the co-op perspective to this, so Zach Anderson with Wolverine Power Cooperative, we are a wholesale generation and transmission provider to many of the co-ops, all of the co-ops in the Lower Peninsula and one of the co-ops in the Upper Peninsula. And so our responsibility for those co-ops, Great Lakes Energy, Cherryland Electric, Presque Isle, Gas and Electric in this area, is to make sure that all of the costs of the data centers are secured and recoverable. So there's a couple of things that we have to think about that's different as not-for-profit electric cooperatives, and that's making sure that we have enforceable contracts that meet minimums to cover 100% of those costs, because if those are stranded, those costs roll directly back to the ratepayer. And so we have to take a practical approach. And I think what is encouraging about the data center conversation right now is that the large-scale, hyperscale data centers are taking responsibility to pay for infrastructure upgrades. So they're willing and recognize that they must pay upfront for interconnection to the electrical grid and upgrades that are required. The other pieces that'll come along with that are new generation infrastructure. And so in Michigan, that's two pieces. One, you need to bring all of your capacity to bear. What does that mean? You need to have generation capacity installed and available around the clock, 24/7, 365, to meet that peak demand plus a reserve margin. And so for a hyperscale data center, that means if it's 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt data center, you need to be bringing 1,200 megawatts of new generation plus renewable energy to bear. And so that's where the rubber needs to meet the road in terms of what the contractual commitments are for that incremental interconnection and the generation. And so to put that in perspective, for the renewable piece alone, we're talking about $3 to $4 billion of new investment to meet the 50% standard, not the 90% standard that was mentioned earlier. So how do we secure that? $4 billion needs to be secured just for the renewables. And then just to give you a practical example, Wolverine owns the largest power plant in northern Michigan, just down the road in Elmira, 400 megawatts. We built that plant 10 years ago for $200 million. That same 400 megawatts today would probably cost upwards of $1 billion to $1.2 billion. So when you need three of those, you got $4 billion for renewables, another $3 billion for the capacity to back that new load. You have to have $7 billion of commitment over that 20-year period. So it's great to have that contract in place. It's great to have that security, but you have to, at least for a not-for-profit co-op, make sure that they are on the hook, not just in writing and in theory, but on the hook in practice and practicality. And so that's what we're trying to manage as these potential opportunities come down the road.
Yeah, so this is Michael Fleck from ITC. Anybody who, I don't know how many of you actually know who ITC is, but we're the transmission provider throughout the lower part of Michigan, as well as out in Iowa, in southern part of Minnesota. And I think these guys all hit on the spot pretty much everything, but I do want to just give a little bit more of a perspective, specifically on the transmission costs. I think, John, you were mentioning the data center out in Cedar Rapids, and that one's a little bit further along than what some of the Saline and the Van Buren Township one is. But just giving us some perspective on that one out there and some of the other data centers that are happening out in Midwest in a very rural area similar to central and northern Michigan. We're seeing that there's going to be somewhere in the range of about a 20% reduction in transmission rates throughout between now and the end of the decade. So that gives you some perspective on the downward pressure that we're seeing, mostly because the infrastructure that we're putting in place, right? We are putting quite a bit of infrastructure in place to make that happen, but it's the amount of load that's actually coming online in a very small area. So we kind of think about it, at least from the rate side, on the transmission side, it's like the total amount of infrastructure divided by the load that's actually there. And it's a disproportionate amount of load that's being added for the capital that we're actually putting in place. And so hopefully that gives you a bit of a perspective of why we're actually seeing downward pressure on the rates from those types of data centers.
Next, we want to talk a little bit about what happens if a data center leaves. They reduce their load or they never reach their projected electricity use. Who pays?
Happy to take a first stab at that one. So as part of the contracts that a utility provider would submit to Public Service Commission to seek their approval to serve one of these large loads, right? And that's a standard piece of our practice. 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts or above, that type of load, right? We would go to the Public Service Commission and have a special contract with that customer because that would be considered, historically speaking, a pretty significant large load. Obviously, these data centers are far and away much bigger than that. And so the contracts that we have been working on with these companies and thus submitting to the Public Service Commission for review and approval, we've really ratcheted up the expectations for these data center providers, specifically around this specific question. So we have, for a large load customer, typically you'd have a 5-year contract. These are nearly 20-year contracts. I think specifically maybe they're 18 or 19 years apiece. In terms of a minimum billing demand, which is the technical term we use, it's 80%. So once a data center signs the contract with DT Electric and that contract is approved by the Public Service Commission, that data center is on the hook for all of those costs, regardless of if they draw a megawatt of power from our system, right? So if they all of a sudden decide to pack up and leave, to not build out their facility or to shut it down early, they're on the hook for the costs associated with that, the power generation, the system upgrades, et cetera, up to 80% of that total amount, right? And that is, per the chair of the Public Service Commission, the toughest standard in the country, right? And so when you think about the contracts that we have with these two companies, and you benchmark those aspects of those contracts against what the balance of the country is doing with regard to having utilities provide service to data center, Michigan has the toughest contracts in the country right now. And I think that's something that, again, is not really well known.
Yeah, I'll just build on that a little bit. And I think it's where the practical reality has to come in terms of who are you dealing with as the counterparty. Those provisions have to be there, but you need a counterparty in terms of the data center itself that can meet those high standards. Because again, I'll bring it back to when you're talking about a single site that requires $7 to $8 to $10 billion of investment, you need to have deep pockets there that can meet those minimum requirements, and you need to have either letters of credit or cash on hand, and you're increasing the frequency of billing. There's a lot that goes into these really strong contracts, and then ultimately you have to try to look for anything and everything behind every corner, because when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, you know you're going to have a fight on your hands with people that have really high-powered lawyers, and they're going to look to get out from under those things. When we're talking about multi-billion dollars, that's a whole other level of fight that you're going to have on your hands. So again, as we think about these things and prepare for them, we just have to be hyper-focused on having those minimum security requirements, cash on hand, letters of credit, really strong support, because if and when they go away, we have to make sure that our members are protected and covered for not just the short term, but the long term as well.
Yeah, I mean, those points are exactly the cover I would cover too. Is first of all, if they leave early, there are tariffs in place to ensure we have cost recovery for that, and it's not passed on to our residential customer. Second, one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on too, because if the data center reduces its load, or it doesn't reach full capacity, there are some safeguards there as well. Part of the tariff that we built with the MPSC allows a data center to reduce their load at maximum by 10%, and they can only do that one time during the life of that contract. And if they do something beyond that, we have, again, as Daniel mentioned, a minimum amount of load and cost recovery that we are going to charge that end user, and not, again, pass that on to our residential customers. So they can only reduce by 10%. So sometimes people say, well, they started here, they went down to here, now they're in here. We're just going to make sure there's protections and safeguards in place. So again, our customers are not going to bear any of that cost. And the third thing, obviously, is if they leave, as we mentioned here, there are cost recovery mechanisms in place. And on the front end for Consumers Energy, and I believe for DTE, and probably all my partners up here, really, we require a $100,000 application fee to support our upfront engineering, for planning costs, and to make sure we're collaborating with our transmission companies, our local providers, and our partners on the other side. So again, those costs aren't borne by our customers. And again, that collateral or that upfront cost, we need to make sure that is a concrete plan in place on the front end, because if somebody does go bankrupt or somebody does go defunct, we need to make sure we have those protections in place for, again, our end users. And again, they pay all the costs from that energy use, and they sign a minimum of a 15-year contract, and that can go up beyond that, as Daniel mentioned. So
we do understand, gentlemen, that it is very imperative that our local government and officials come into this conversation prepared and educated. So should they engage in conversations with data centers, what conditions would DTE, consumers, or ITC recommend that local governments require before supporting a data center?
She asked you guys.
Here, I'll take this soon after wrap it.
I want to answer it.
Yeah. I think, John, you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning about some of the questions you should be asking. The infrastructure, and it obviously depends on the type of data center, whether it be the hyperscalers, whether it be the edge computing. It's quite a bit different, right? And especially whenever it comes to infrastructure. The infrastructure, at least on the power side, on the utility side, many of them, especially when you start looking at the hyperscalers, they're really being connected off of the highest voltage, like their 138 kV, the 345 kV grid, the larger towers that are coming out are around in the northern part of Michigan. So I think one of the biggest things that you probably want to be aware of is that are they serious, right? Because there are a lot of data centers that are out there right now that are fishing, quite frankly. I know that DTE and consumers, I'm sure Wolverine too, they look at trying to filter these projects out and see that what are actually real and what are not. You want to make sure that they actually have an end-use customer in mind, right? That's very important. End-use customer, if they don't have that, they are still kind of fishing around. The second thing is trying to understand what the infrastructure is up front. Have they been working with the utilities, whether it be consumers, ITC, DTE, Wolverine? Has there been coordinated collaboration between the 3 or 4 parties that are actually out there? You'll want to know what type of infrastructure. I mean, when they come around, they should have an idea of the amount of transmission infrastructure that have to play out, siting, what this actually looks like for their site, what they look like the layout would be. And then really where that's going to be placed, where it's going to be in proximity to other infrastructure, how that's going to actually impact customers, the individuals within the community. So I think trying to keep those things in mind at the very forefront of this is very important.
I'll just jump in real quick because I want people to know that it's not just Consumers Energy up here talking to you. I'm also a county commissioner in Manistee County, so I understand some of the struggles that we're dealing with in this space. Not only from a Consumers Energy perspective, but my other hat is a local resident and a county commissioner in Manistee County. So it's a great question, and I'm so thrilled that you answered it because the perception is, are we pro data center? Are we pushing these? Actually, we're not. We're actually just trying to provide the right information, and as John mentioned, ask the right questions so it's a good fit for your community. And what does that look like? And a lot of things that we talked about is there infrastructure there? Is there space there? One risk that I would put, one questions that I would put and make sure that we look for is we don't, when we're looking at regulations and planning and zoning, make sure that we're conscious of planning and zoning rules that already established by the MPSC, our FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because we don't want to create a local ordinance or zoning that conflicts with some of those, because we'll put ourselves in a real awkward spot. So we want to make sure we're really good about and thought out about some of those things. But one other thing I'd want to make clear is as I mentioned, Consumers Energy, DT, and our partners up here, we're kind of the provider of last resort. We have to provide energy to our customers that are in our service territories. And so whether that be a new Starbucks, a Chick-fil-A that's going in down the road here that I heard about, an Amazon warehouse, a manufacturer, a northern professional football team that might come to northern Michigan, or a data center. We are required by law to serve those customers to the best of our ability and make sure that we don't pass on those costs to our customers. And I'll just say one last thing in closing. We did some analysis of Michigan's population over the last 20-25 years, and we're not dead last, but we're almost dead last in population growth for our state. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but we do want to make sure that we're providing opportunity, economic growth opportunities for the next generation. But we want to make sure that's smart, planned out, and well thought out for the communities that are looking to embrace some of these opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what my colleague said up here, as a regulated utility in the state of Michigan, we do have an obligation to serve, right? We cannot turn customers away. If a customer can pay their bill and they can connect to our system safely, we're required to help them connect and to be served. And so when we work with, and specifically for DT, when we work with ITC, let's say we have a data center or a developer seeking to get some land under control to potentially attract a client. When they approach us, we will look for good areas of the system, the transmission system and the distribution system in particular, to site these projects, right? We're looking at where can power flow, where there's available capacity to serve these large loads. But that doesn't mean that necessarily our point of view takes into account how you and your community feel about development, right? So in the case of the two projects that DT has in our service territory, the Saline Township project was interesting because the community itself was in violation of Michigan's Zoning Enabling Act. They did not have the right amount of land defined in their community to be in compliance with that law, and that became an issue in that project, right? Now, it was a rezoning project, meaning they were seeking to rezone agricultural land. There were 3 family farmers that were selling out. They were the last generation that wanted to farm the land. And so through the rezoning process, the developer could put forth conditions for that rezoning, and that's where sort of the community benefit stuff began to become part of the conversation. Van Buren was a little bit different because it was zoned industrial land already. The community had said, this is where we want to have this type of industrial development done in our community. But the Planning Commission did something I thought was super smart, which is as the developer went through the site plan approval process, the Planning Commission said, we're going to give you conditional site plan approval at the preliminary stage if your developer has an agreement with our township board on what they call generically like a development agreement. But that was the gateway to have a broader conversation with the developer's customer, which is now known as Google, to sort of outline what community benefits for the community could look like, right? And that's where the tax abatement conversation played out and the broader community benefits conversation played out. And I thought that was a really smart way to go. These are two very different examples of how projects got, across the finish line, if you will, in our service territory. In the case of Van Buren Township, I know the community benefits for Saline were highlighted in the presentation, but in Van Buren, right, even after the township approved a PA 198 tax abatement, they're still collecting an extra $2 million a year in property taxes, or $23 million over the 12-year period. There's another $37 million going to the local public school district. There's even more tax dollars going to Wayne County, which is where Van Buren is. And on top of that, Google is donating $15.5 million to the community for parks and other public improvements. They brought forward $10 million of localized energy efficiency programming. And so there's lots of ways for these things to kind of get ironed out. But these are two really good examples of how to learn from projects and apply those learnings to potentially things that might be coming forward in your communities.
Just to close this section, I would say the number one thing would be we're happy to help as cooperatives and as utility partners. So if anyone's approaching you about a data center, reach out to your local co-op. Wolverine's happy to get engaged in this to assess whether it's real or not, because I've joked often internally, with so much money at play behind these data centers, there's a lot of people out there with Google Earth and a dream. They're like, I'm going to search around and I see a power line and I'm going to plug in there, and it's not really realistic in a lot of areas, especially as we sit here and we're talking specifically about northern Michigan. We've got one 345 kV interconnection to the rest of the state, and there's no 345 between where we sit here in Gaylord and all the way to Marquette, Michigan. So there's not a lot of high likelihood that a hyperscaler data center is going to come in to this area. But that doesn't mean as rural Michigan we should be left behind in what the opportunities might be. And so as you talk about availability of small scale distributed data centers in that 1 megawatt, 5 megawatt, 15 megawatt range that can help improve accessibility for rural Michigan, that's where we as co-ops are really well positioned to serve that. So I would say get us engaged. We have abundant clean energy. We have generation capacity to be able to meet these demands for smaller scale data centers. And we've done a lot of historical infrastructure investment in northern Michigan that we are well positioned to serve the small scale data centers. So I would say know what your infrastructure is. Don't rule out that all data centers are created equal. If it's a hyperscaler, it's probably not likely that it's coming to northern Michigan just because of the physical infrastructure, right? But there are opportunities that exist that I think are important to make sure that rural Michigan has accessibility. Fiber access has come to rural Michigan because the two co-ops that encircle Gaylord, Presque Isle and Great Lakes Energy, have made a tremendous amount of investment in fiber infrastructure, again, to make sure that high-speed accessibility is available, because, again, we need that for economic growth in northern Michigan, even if hyperscale data centers aren't likely to come to this area just because there isn't the huge power infrastructure here from a transmission perspective.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much for those insights. We are going to take a few questions from our crowd. Again, this event was created to educate our local and community officials and really educate them on data centers in an unbiased space. So we are going to take a few questions from elected community officials. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Dakota will come find you with the microphone, and just let us know what community you represent and state your name as well. It sounds like you gentlemen have really covered everything fantastic for them, and I don't have any questions to say. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to come up and have these questions. And yes, sir, go ahead. We've got a mic here. Dakota.
Yes, my name is Gary Madden. I'm a trustee with Manistee Township in Manistee County. You painted a pretty benign picture about benefits. I'm wondering about the use of all this. capacity, computing capacity, going to do for people? And the second, I just had a comment too. There's been a lot of comments from our panel about no cost being passed on to consumers. Yet we all know that you folks represent businesses, for-profit organizations who are prepared to invest billions and billions of dollars. That billions of dollars investment expects a return eventually. And we all know where that return is going to come from. It's going to come from people. And not necessarily in the form of higher electric bills, but in one form or another, higher costs of food, clothing, housing, whatever. Somehow, that money that's invested is going to expect a return. So that's just a comment I wanted to make. But I do have the question about what is this data new collection system going to provide? What kind of capacity is it going to provide for people?
Well, I don't think any of us up here are going to be authorities on the benefits of data centers or artificial intelligence beyond our unique industries, right? I'll just talk to my personal experience, right? So I've begun to use AI tools more and more in my daily life, my professional life. They're making me slightly more efficient in some tasks. I'm certainly on the learning curve, right? You know, like it takes a while to get Microsoft Copilot, which is the tool that DT uses, to kick out a memo for me that I think is like something I would, if I were starting from scratch, right? It would be up to my standards. So like there are these individual use cases that I think will make our lives more convenient, more easier. I would really want sort of the chamber here to find people who can speak to, I think, the societal significant changes that could happen in terms of breakthroughs in medical research or other things that the power of the compute that these data centers will drive, you know, could potentially bring. I don't know if my colleagues have any other thoughts.
I would agree. The business plan for a data center is hard for us to speculate about because we're not in that business, but we are in the business of saying if this new facility or a new project comes to here, can we provide them energy and not pass on costs to our customers? Data computing, I mean, on a personal level, there's so many new items in my house that now have data storage, and whether that's my refrigerator, my treadmill, my Fitbit, everything from purchasing gas to groceries to is all collecting data and using that to better serve their customers. So I think that strategy to address more deliberately to their customers is part of what they're trying to accomplish through warehousing this data. But again, I don't know enough about their business plan to talk about that very intelligently. So
I'll just take it on from the cost perspective, not to paint too benign of a picture. I think your question is fair. We've talked a lot about how we recover the incremental costs associated with the data center. Strong contract, a good actor, you can do that, and I think it is practical and manageable to do that. It's a big, big lift, multi-billion-dollar lift. However, there is the practical reality that because there's so much infrastructure required, more transformers, more generation, both renewable and traditional, that's driving inflation. You have so much money being poured into new power infrastructure that everything has become more expensive. We have not seen that impact yet. It's coming. And a small portion of a really big number, and I'll try to land this, if you're talking about 1,000 megawatt data center in the state of Michigan, that's a 5% increase in load. Just that single data center. And so when you look at that and you extrapolate that across the country, there are tremendous inflationary pressures that are going to come from an infrastructure investment because transformers get more expensive the more scarce they are. Same with solar, wind, and natural gas to stand all this stuff up. So if we've painted too benign of a picture, I will share that practical reality that the externalities, we can cover all the direct costs, but all the externalities and all the upward price pressure it puts on everything else, that is real, and there's still a tremendous amount of, I'll say, bread and butter investment that has to happen from a transmission perspective that's ongoing with our new renewable energy standard here in Michigan. There's a ton of investment that's being faced by the state already, and that's getting more expensive because there's more demand for all of the inputs into this huge new infrastructure that's required.
All right, gentlemen. Well, on behalf of the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and information with us today. All right, Dakota, we will turn it back over to you.
In the next section, you're going to see me and Dr. Sarah Mills from the University of Michigan engage in a conversation about one of the biggest concerns we hear in Northern Michigan, the environmental concerns. What about water use, noise pollution, decommissioning? What happens with all of these different things when a data center is put into a community, and what do communities need to do to make sure that they are safe if a proposal is knocking at the door? So we're going to move into another big one. We've talked a little bit about costs of the grid infrastructure. I'd like to welcome Dr. Sarah Mills. She's the director for the Center for Empowering Communities for the University of Michigan. Traveled all the way up here from Ann Arbor today to speak with us. So a round of applause for Dr. Mills as we have a conversation. All right, Dr. Mills, thanks for coming up here today. We really appreciate having you all the way up in Northern Michigan. So we're going to talk a little bit about another big public concern, which is the environmental piece. One of the perhaps most controversial elements of this for communities in our footprint, because Northern Michigan has one of the greatest environmental spaces anywhere in the world, really. So, we want to talk about how we're going to protect that and what the impact is going to be with regard to these projects and our environment. So let's start with we're going to go for a home run right out of the gate here. How much water does a data center realistically use, and can it be required? Is there any possibility that it could be required to use low or no potable water cooling technology?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And actually, before I answer the water question, I'm going to give you a little bit of what I do and don't know. So at the university, because that's what PhDs are good at, is we know that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. At the university, I sit in the Graham Sustainability Institute. So the environmental stuff is my space, but my PhD is in farmland preservation. And for the last 10 years, I have actually studied large-scale renewable energy. I studied the wind farms driving up 127 to my in-laws' cottage in Bel Air. So anyway, and what I have funding from the State Energy Office that sits in Eagle, so the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, to help local governments understand the positives and the negatives about wind and solar and battery energy storage, and then help them figure out what they can do within their zoning. So that is what I do. I am talking to you about data centers. I've written a guidebook on data centers, cleverly named What Michigan Local Government Should Know About Data Centers. Not clever at all. But I will be really frank with you that 9 months ago I knew nothing about data centers. And the reason that I have effectively done a second PhD in data centers is because they're going for places that have access to the grid, which is the same kind of places that wind and solar and battery storage facilities want to hook up to. So, with all of that, I know more about energy than I do about water. Here's what I've learned about the question that you asked, sorry, Dakota, about water, which is, it depends. Yeah. How much water they use really depends. Some of it depends on the things that John talked about earlier, which is how big they are. Right? A bigger data center has more computers that need to be cooled than a smaller data center. But also, there's a couple of different ways that data centers can be cooled. The ones that we hear about are ones that are cooled with evaporative cooling. Those are big water users. A big data center can use 5 million gallons of water a day, which I am not a water person, so I was like, that feels like a lot to me, right? Just for some context, the Great Lakes Water Authority that serves the water utilities around Detroit uses 1 billion gallons of water a day. Our power plants in the state of Michigan that are cooled with water, nuclear, coal, and some natural gas, they use 5 billion gallons of water a day. That's what they withdraw largely from the Great Lakes. They put most of it back out, right? But that is the same, that's just some context setting. So they can use a lot of water, but there's also data centers, especially those small ones, those edge data centers that John talked about, that effectively have fancy air conditioning. Like they can be air cooled. The problem with that is that when you're cooling with air, rather than letting the water take away the heat, it uses more electricity, which then can have an indirect impact on water use. So, and honestly, right now, University of Michigan, there's some engineers, not me, who are doing an analysis to try to understand in the state of Michigan, which is better to cool with, water or energy. And it kind of depends. It depends on what kind of power plants are serving that data center, but also it depends on where you are. So in terms of your question, though, can you require it? Maybe. This is one where it's not quite clear. So if the data center is going to withdraw water, and it's one of the data centers that uses a lot of water, the state of Michigan requires that Eagle gives a permit if a well, a pump, is pumping more than 70 gallons, is capable of pumping more than 70 gallons per minute. Math, that's 100,000 gallons per day. So if you're going to cool with the data center, like if you've got a water-cooled data center, you're going to need one of those permits if you're going to take groundwater or surface water kind of thing. Actually, in order to get that tax incentive that John talked about, they need to be hooked up to a public utility. We have some public utilities in the state of Michigan, water utilities, that were meant to serve much larger populations. What you said, I've heard that Michigan is 49th in terms of population growth. So yes, not last, second to last. That's sad, right? Like we have many communities that were built for a lot larger population. And so some of them really need a bit more water user. But the other thing is that in places, our rural townships don't have water, like, right? We had well water, and actually it was terrible, sulfur water, like we had to have it hauled in. They actually, like in Saline Township, they're forming a public utility just associated with that water well at the data center. So they're in that situation. In the case where it's a public utility, there's a lot more water utility. There's additional levers in terms of what you can do in terms of regulating water use and what the rates are and all of that kind of thing.
Well, I'll tell you, that was tremendously helpful. I knew nothing about that before this conversation, so very enlightening. So moving away from water, on to our next one. What about backup diesel or gas generation? What would you say a new project, a proposed project, would require backup diesel or gas? And then if that's the case, and if it's not the case, there should be a short answer, what emissions testing and public reporting rules would apply to that?
Yeah. Okay, so medium scale answer is that most of them do have to have some sort of backup generation on site, in part to not break the grid. Sorry, utilities. But like, it's really hard when a big user of power uses a lot and then uses a little and then uses a lot and uses a little power. That's really hard for the grid to operate. And when there's an AI model being trained, there's all of these kind of spikes. I'm seeing some nods, so I'm not totally saying it in easy words, but like that's true. So there's some spikes, but also you and I, when we're Googling, right? Like it's just how much power in aggregate, like we're drawing, like there's some spikes in how much that data center is chugging effectively. And so very often, increasingly, there'll be there's already some kind of backup power supplies on even those small data centers, because remember the desktop computers we would plug into those like big boxes I'm seeing heads nod in the back too, right? To like deal with the surges or whatever, like to make things cool overall. The data center, effectively the computer equipment in the data center needs the same sort of thing. Sometimes you can provide that with a backup diesel generator or gas generator. Honestly, all the up and downs kind of wear it out. Battery energy storage, like big batteries, are another way that you can effectively smooth it out. If you're going to have a backup generator, so sometimes those backup generators are to deal with power outages, and for some data centers, particularly John's middle category, the co-location data centers, tend to be ones where their clients who are renting space, and those can include hospital systems, they can include the the Secretary of State's office with all of our driver's license information, they expect 100% uptime, right? And so like they need to, very often they've got backup generators for when the power goes out to keep on going. Newer data centers or ones that are not doing that, if they're cloud computing or they're doing AI, they just need that backup generation to cool things down or to send the data to Texas to say like, you take over. Like we don't need to have 100% of our power provided all of the time. But the reason that this matters for local governments or for community members is that there's emissions associated with that, right? Like there's air emissions associated with backup generators. I do not have a backup generator in my house, but my parents do. And I was like, who's regulating this? They did not get a permit from EGLE, like the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy for this. They don't. There's a threshold. EGLE has a threshold about when you have to pay, like get an air permit from them. And you can't cheat the system. They know if you're putting a whole bunch of small generators together in one place, it will trigger that threshold. What the number is, don't quiz me. It's in the guide. I point to like what all of those rules are. But that is who regulates the backup generation. I'm sorry. I talk too long.
No, you're doing great. This is excellent. Yeah, I think everybody here really appreciates this. So so we've talked about water. We've talked about backup generation, diesel, gas. Let's talk about noise. Noise is another one that we've heard a lot about from different communities. So what noise standards, setbacks, and mitigation measures would you recommend should be required to protect nearby residents?
If you don't leave here with anything else, it is this. I think that we should be regulating for sound for all sorts of industrial uses. This is something that is standard for renewable energy. And honestly, that is the number one thing. Even in a solar farm, people think about like the sound associated with the inverter, right? The cooling fan on that. That is very doable, very important for quality of life. And honestly, let's be real here. Like we have not had new industrial development in most of Michigan in a really long time. And we haven't looked at the zoning regulations associated with industrial uses to say like, let's modernize these. And so sound is a key one. If you're thinking about sound, it's tricky. Like, I'm not going to lie. It's not just the number. There's, like 45 decibels, 55 decibels, that is important. Ambient sound matters, so you're not going to hear things that are along 75, right, as much as you would 2 miles away from 75. And so that matters. Sometimes you can set the sound ordinance to be above ambient, right, like 5 decibels above ambient. But also something that's really important is to think about whether you're averaging the sound or doing an instantaneous reading. Again, there's a whole bunch. This is standard for renewable energy. And so my team has developed tools for the kind of studies that you ask of developers who are proposing new things and to kind of help you understand what using LEQ 1 hour versus LMAX. These are weird sound standards, again, beyond my pay grade. But what those things mean. And so it's really standard. Setbacks help. The sound dissipates with distance. Vegetative screening helps, right? You got to think about winter, too. So those are all different kinds of things. And in case we don't say it, I'm just going to say the other thing that every zoning ordinance should have in it, I don't know that you're going to ask me this, decommissioning. We would not have many brownfields in this state if we had thought about that in the past. It is standard for renewable energy to have the developer tell you how they're going to take their stuff away at the end of the life of that project. The second part is to have in place a funding mechanism so that if they're not around, you've got money to pay to take the stuff away. And again, that is standard for renewable energy. I think it should be standard for all industrial development. It's being a good neighbor in the future. So anyway.
Oh, fantastic. That was a popular answer. Excellent. So I have one more question for you before we turn it over back to our audience to ask some more questions.
Okay.
Has there been any significant data showing links to local resident health being impacted by a data center?
Yeah, so this one, I knew it was coming. He's reading it. He told me what he was going to say, but I have some notes. I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm honestly, I'll be honest, I Googled, right? And I've been asking around, so it's not just Googling. There are some studies coming out. So here's what what I've been able to understand from the literature. Most of the stuff about this is associated with particulate matter from the generators on site. So that's why it matters how often, like what kind of backup generators there are and how often they're running. In some places, because there's limitations on the grid, like this is common in like Texas and that kind of places, where they're effectively, like the developer is doing all of their generation on site, right? And so like that is one of the, like that's the strongest link. I'll say that there are some of what I was able to find is associated with sound, and this is people. This is, I'll also say this also comes up in the energy space, where people are hearing it, and it stresses them out. That's honestly what the medical research says about like wind turbine sound. It's that you're hearing it, especially if you didn't want it in your community, that stresses you out. And we know that stress has physiological impacts, right? And so like I think thinking about sound and quality of life is really important. In some places, there's some talk about what's in the water discharge. Again, one of the things that's really tricky or beneficial or something to keep in mind if you're out on the internet, as people are, right, is that different states have different requirements. So Michigan, like in many states, water regulations are done by EPA. In the state of Michigan, we get to do our own because we care about water. And so I think that like we've got some pretty strong protections in terms of what's in wastewater. If you're going to discharge to the ground or to a surface body, like you've got to get appropriate permits. It's going to be tested. So on the medical side, sorry, one more thing that's not written down, and I was just thinking about going back to zoning. The other quality of life impact that I write about in the guide that I think matters, particularly for thinking about in industrial infrastructure in rural places, is light pollution. Because oftentimes this is going to places where there are no street lights. I grew up at the end of a dirt road. Like there's no street lights, right? And especially if there's security lighting 24/7, that matters. You've got an example. Emmett County has the dark skies. Like that applies to all the things. That is thinking about light pollution and applying that to industrial uses, especially in places where you don't have a lot of industrial development, I think is important. And so I didn't say this explicitly, and I'm thinking about saying it now. I'm not convinced that we need data center specific standards. I think our zoning ordinances should differentiate, like should talk about zoning or about data centers. I really want them to differentiate based on size because scale matters for a lot of things. But I think more importantly, like use this attention about data centers as an opportunity to rethink industrial development. It comes along with property taxes and the point, like maybe not tons of jobs, but some that are particularly meaningful, right, in a place. And it can have quality of life impacts. And so let's use this as an opportunity to think about how we can have our cake and eat it too, right? Like be ready for industrial development, but also make sure that it is in keeping with the things that we care about that make our place the place that we love.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Mills, thank you for your time answering kind of my scripted questions for you. Now we're going to turn it back over to the audience, and I want to make a small kind of amendment to our statement. If you were, this is, intended to be providing information and a space to ask questions for all of you local leadership who are going to be making these decisions. It doesn't have to be just elected, appointed positions, local community leadership that is going to be at the table when these conversations are happening. We're trying to prioritize those questions first. That's all we're doing there. It's not exclusionary. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Ashley will bring over a microphone. We're going to do as best to get as many as we can in the 10-minute time window, but we'll have contacts for after if we don't get to. Thank you for that statement, sir. Please, if you have a question, though, we're trying to give opportunities to ask questions here today.
I Googled it. Guys, I should have gone to my office before driving up here. It's online, or email me, and I'll give you, they're going to send you my email. You can get it through there, but you can also write it down. SB as in boy, Mills, MILLS, at UMICH.edu. So I'm happy to send it. There's also, for what it's worth, I've been traveling around. So there's a hour-long YouTube recording for me talking in Cass County, and the slides associated with it. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. And just to repeat it for the sake of the cameras recording today, just so that they pick up the sound, to get Dr. Mills's guide, one more time.
To get the guide, it's sbmills at umich.edu. Also, you can Google, like, what Michigan local government should know about data centers.
And we will link this in the website that we put out here shortly following this presentation. Okay, any additional questions?
If I can. So,
the question was, what did Saline Township do wrong that northern Michigan communities should avoid doing so that they don't end up in any hot water?
So, for those of you who don't know about zoning, you're planning commission. I'm a planning commissioner too, so, right? So the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act says that you cannot ban a lawful land use for which there is a demonstrated need, though you may be able to effectively set reasonable standards. He knew that. Those of you who aren't on planning commissions, you might not know that, right? That effectively was the basis of the lawsuit, that they didn't have enough land that was zoned for industrial, that they didn't have any land zoned for industrial. And so that is tricky. So number one thing in my guide is effectively saying large-scale data centers are industrial development. Look at first of all, go to your master plan and see where your master plan is calling for industrial uses. You should have industrial uses somewhere. Just like you've got a mobile home park district, you should have an industrial district. Now, over time, once upon a time, we buffered industrial uses. Now, we've seen more residential development, right? So they might be right next to the industrial district. So we need to think about, like, the next part is, think about what kind of quality of life impact, or what kind of quality of life regulations you want to apply, particularly if you've got residential that is right abutting. There's nothing that says you have to expand your industrial district, but you should have one. The other thing that I should say, people say, should they have thought, like, is this a demonstrated use, or is this a use for which a lawful land use for which there's a demonstrated need? And what I would say is, both at the federal level and at the state level, we have policymakers saying, we're giving incentives for this. I feel like that is a hard lawsuit to win, that there's not need. Now, again, though, I would also say the next sentence in the Zoning Enabling Act says, and you can put on conditions to fit with to be in keeping with your particular place. So that's what that is. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, if we could have a round of applause for Dr. Mills for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Mills, so much for your time. In our final conversation today, my friend Bob Terpstra joins me from Kent County, Michigan, Gaines Township. He is a township supervisor, and Gaines Township is the home of the Switch Data Center. He's here all the way from Grand Rapids with his lovely wife to discuss what this looks like from a local impact. Relating to those in the audience, what does a data center do for our communities in terms of tax bases and funding? And what does he need to do, and what do we need to do if these conversations move forward to plan anything? All right, we have one more section for you today. So as we were trying to gather a good comprehensive representation of the various needs and concerns our communities face, we thought it would be beneficial to ask somebody from a place that already has a data center that is on a similar position as a local elected official, a township supervisor from Kent County, specifically Gaines Township. I have with me Dr. or doctor. You could be a doctor today. Bob Terpstra. Bob Terpstra is going to come up and join me for a conversation about what this all looks like and how it impacts you from a local perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Bob drove all the way up here, I think last night. Did you enjoy your drive, Bob? Enjoy Gaylord today?
It was great because my wife drove the whole way. It was great.
Fantastic.
Oops, sorry.
There you go. You want to say that again for the camera?
My wife drove last night. She saw good to me so that I could read and rest, whatever, be here.
Well, Bob, we're so thrilled to have both you and your wife with us today. And so from your perspective, as somebody who is a local elected official in a place with a data center, what should Northern Michigan leaders, like those in this room, learn from other communities that have already had data center proposals?
So does everybody know that Switch is in our township? The pyramid they're empty for 10 years. The reason the pyramid became an interesting site was not because it was the pyramid, but because there's more underground than there is above ground. And at the time that they came, which is 10 years ago, probably 9, they wanted the ability to have the 55-degree air underground. That was phase 1. Phase 2 has been built, and it's much different technology than what's underground. And I don't know when the transition happened, but the cooling that is needed became about chips and not the air. So now the water is cooling the chips, so the water usage is far less. They're into phase 3. They're designing it. They tell us they have to come to our planning commission every single time because everything is much of the technology is changing. Every phase, which is now happening, which is what's happening now because Microsoft has a piece of property that they've already purchased. They already have a buy right to it. I could go into much more of that, but Switch has been a very good partner. I don't know that we hit everything you all said, and what you all said is right on. We have lived it. We have these contracts. We're addressing decommissioning. 18 months I've kind of been at this, gotten more booze in my life than ever, but it's happening. It's going to happen, and we have contracts that are working. The light is down, the noise is down. I stand on the edge of the property at Switch, and it's 55 and below. I just took out my meter to read what's happening in this room. It's well into the hundreds. You walk out of the building into the neighborhood next door to Switch, and you don't hear a hum. Some people claim they do, but it's also next to M6. So what are they hearing? I would say what these people all said is very important. Find out what kind it is. Cloud, hyperscales, data, AI, the minis. The problem for us with Microsoft is the technology is changing. They have 400 acres, or they will have 400 acres in our township. They will not commit to cloud or AI because it's 18 months from purchase, which most people don't know will happen this month. 18 months to make a plan, design the buildings, 18 months to clear the land, 18 months to build a building. And then they're supposedly going to build 6, 7 buildings. That's 10 years, folks. I'm actually way more concerned about the construction, like you mentioned. That's way louder. And that's a long time. So we're working with them on a contract right now. We have a contract with Switch. The contract, putting yourself in a position of negotiating what is important to you and your township is number one probably for me. And you can do that by putting in the right zoning ordinances. So you were right. Sarah was right that the master plan and the ordinances need to be appropriate, and they need to align with the state government, with what's everybody saying. And then add the pieces around light and sound. That's not hard. It's not hard at all. Location matters enormously. The pyramid was there. You need to be looking at what the location that would be best for you. Switch is kitty corner from a neighborhood, from Bailey's Grove. Nobody in 10 years has said one word of complaint about Switch. Nobody. Not the traffic. There's not that much. Ask up front what the employee amount is going to be, and you'll discover it's way higher in the local people that they hire to do the construction. Switch is now down to maybe 20 to 30 in the building, And those 20 to 30 people in the pyramid are all six-figure salaries. They've added to our township. Now they want to live in our township because they want to live where they work. So that's been a boon for us. So location really, really matters. I recently drove to Wisconsin, again with my wife, to Mount Pleasant because I wanted to see for myself on my dime what it looked like to have a construction site of a Microsoft data center, and that one is an AI. And it was enormous. It's a square mile, but it's sitting in an entire industrial zone. And then kitty corner was a neighborhood. We drove there, put a sound meter on my phone, stood at the edge of it on Memorial Day night when nobody was there, and it was 55 on site. The next morning, all of the noise was construction. It was outrageous. But it's in an industrial area where they're putting in an enormous amount of infrastructure, which I think is going to benefit their town. That's what they say. Talk to a woman in the neighborhood, doesn't bother at all. Location does matter with what you're going to require, though. Try to find out the timeline for construction, what their layout is. Work with them and not against them. In our case, we had a relationship with the people buying Switch early on. We talked to them about if you're going to be here. I don't know who, my planners must have been great people. It's long before my time, but they were on it. So they created contracts with them about what they would do, including the give back to the community. So they sponsor events, and as our relationship grows and they get farther along, they're going to help us develop a township that is kind of known for recreation. I'm asking Microsoft the same thing. I've already asked them for millions of dollars to help us develop what is important to our township. After doing a whole open house and finding out what their priorities are, I've given that to them, and yes, they want to help us. So they're going to do that. Know the laws so that you don't get in trouble. And I would try to do my very, very best to reduce the fears. I didn't know that. So our meetings are full of people with a lot of fears and just don't do this and don't really understand the today narrative, the language, the rules, the laws, the ability of the technology today. Google it and you get really bad stuff. It's not a lie, it's true. But it's not today. The technology has come along. I saw the one in Texas. I have opinions about that. That isn't what's happening here. Saw the one in Wisconsin. Ours is going to be different than that. So know what's happening today. So what I was going to was fear is a big deal in our community. Our meetings are full. There's been a lot of incivility. I'm trying to own as a supervisor to help people understand what's appropriate in this culture, in this world right now, and what isn't. And if they have fears, they're expressing anger, which is a secondary emotion, but address what they're afraid of. And you just got it all this morning, right? But it's important to do that up front. There's 7 data centers in Grand Rapids. Nobody even know it. They've been there for decades. They're smaller ones, but they're all over the place, and you just don't know it. And they're not going away. So,
well, thank you. Thank you, Bob.
I gave you too much, maybe.
No, that was great. And by the way, don't hesitate if you'd like me to flick around any of these slides. You just tell me that.
Well, I made 3 maps of where those other data centers are located. I don't know if they're helpful to you or not, but this is switches. You can see it's from above. There's a residential area, kitty corner from it, but it's mostly near an industrial center. And what has happened in 10 years is many more tech companies have come to be right there. It's very convenient. It's right off the highway. It's like they've created this tech center. And a little farther away, you can see we have Amazon. Now, in terms of when Switch came, I don't know who was part of this, but we were trying to attract Amazon to the township because the growth in our area is incredible right now because M6 came through. So we're located where everybody wants to be right now. It's a beautiful rural township, and I want to do both. I want to do both. But they are in an industrial area, and Microsoft bought land right behind them. It's not something we're giving up.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We've got about 10 minutes, you and I, before we get to the audience. Oh, no, you're doing great. We've just got a few more questions I want to ask you here. So talking about the tax exemptions, we've all heard a little bit about that. How do Michigan's data center tax exemptions affect the local financial benefit to schools, counties, townships, and residents?
They only help because all the revenue is going to come in. In the case of Switch, they were given a Renaissance grant, and then we were given a pilot grant to make up the difference. So we were made whole at the time that they came into the township. And now, with Microsoft coming in, they're not asking for anything. They will pay their way on everything. And so we've already met with their tax lawyers to say, we'll probably become your biggest tax base, your revenue generators. And they are. We saw that. And so all of those other organizations that get taxes from our property taxes are all going to benefit. That being said, we're talking about doing a perpetual care fund in case it goes away. And we can do that by law. We can put some of the money that comes in as revenue into a fund because in our township we want to do recreation and we want to preserve the land. So our two top priorities are land acquisition. So we're going to buy land that we're going to declare as green space indefinitely. And we're going to develop green spaces and parks. They're actually going to put one in for us when they build.
Well, that's fantastic. And can you, one more time, just for the benefit of everyone in the room, repeat what that act is that you're creating in case it decommissions? What was that called? A Perpetual Care Act?
The decommissioning is a different topic. Our contract with, I don't know that we have this for Switch because we didn't think about it then, maybe. But with Microsoft coming in, they are doing a conditional rezone contract with us. It's 11 pages, covers absolutely every topic that was mentioned here. They will have to do it. And I know our lawyer well. I know their lawyer well. Microsoft is paying for everything, all of our legal fees. And the contract is 11 pages. It's right now in the hands of their lawyer, and will come back to us and address everything. So the act is, no, there's no act around it, but decommissioning should be required. The pilot grant, nobody will need that because they don't need to be given a break. Right?
Yeah. All right. So I think it was the fund, right? A Perpetual Care Fund. You said.
Yes, that's what I was talking
I misspoke.
about. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that was on me.
Okay.
Okay. So my next question to you is about jobs.
Yeah.
We've heard, different. Some of our presenters have alluded to this a few times about the different types of jobs that data centers bring to the community. So how many permanent local jobs? Because we all know that there's construction jobs, but after the construction's over, how many permanent local jobs should a community sort of expect realistically after it's over? And what kind of jobs are those?
When it's actually operational, the number of jobs is going to be far less than the construction crews that are in your town building. And I can't really answer that because it depends on what scale it is, right? So at Switch, in one building, I think there's between 20 and 30 workers. I talked to a guy that's been there for 10 years, has nothing but positive to say. It's a very clean environment. There's no diseases. There's no things that people are saying. None of that has become true. But he's a six-figure guy, right? So the middle class is growing because of Switch. And Microsoft says that's about the same thing. So hundreds and hundreds of people are working in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. We even started at our Microsoft site, and Switch has had construction workers locally for all 7 years, 7 or 8 years. So, but that's hundreds of people. I can't tell you how many are in the new cloud centers. Even though I called her and she didn't call me back. So,
okay. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so my last question for you, and this is kind of sort of another home run shot at it, right? So today's entire event really is about combating misinformation, right? We know that there's a lot that we don't know. There's certainly a lot that I don't know and that I didn't know before this conversation, before all of these panels today. So from your experience as a township supervisor in a place where there is an operating data center, what concerns around the state or around the country about data centers are typically misinformation, and what concerns from residents are very legitimate concerns?
So I'm going to give you the misinformation first, and you've heard them all. People using AI to find out about AI and to find out about data centers. And AI will pull from the failed data centers all over the country. Yes, you can find the stories, and I believe they're true. Arizona, Nebraska, Loudoun County, they all have issues with water, too much, with noise, all of the stuff that you've mentioned. Is that going to be true today? Don't let it be, and stop it. So there's a lot of but it's misinformation for today. It's not misinformation for what's been out there, okay? So know what's happening today, know what the technology could be. Water and power fees, people continue to say there's no way they can do that without charging the residents. And yes, there is. They have to by law. That's misinformation that I can't convince people of. House values declining. I can't find that to be true. I don't know that that's true in Bailey's Grove. We haven't been able to do that. Waste concerns are a big deal. Some of the heat going out. The assumption that the water is going to drain our aquifers, and no, the water is coming through the utility authority. Anybody rural in our township with a well is not going to be touched. It's coming from other places. People don't want to believe that. They just don't think it's true. And then the waste that's produced from the closed loop system creates a sludge that Eagle, I believe, says has to be shipped out to a very special waste plant to take care of that. So that's not going into our sewers, even though people think that will be. The conversation of misinformation around the school that got built next door to the Microsoft property, now those kids are all going to get ADD or they're going to get autism or they're going to get something. There's no evidence of any of that. If that were true, it would already be true. And we don't see that. The kind of chemicals in the closed loop, we're demanding no PFAS, and they say, no problem, we don't use it. But people think they use it. And the diesel generators, and Switch is building their own. They may switch to nuclear as soon as it becomes an option, because that's the way to go if you're trying to create your own energy. And Microsoft will have generators that are not diesel. But every month or quarter or year, everybody has to be tested and submit a report, and we're asking for those reports. So the misinformation on that one is that there's a David and Goliath syndrome going on here, that we'll have nothing to say about any of it. And it's just not true. We're putting it into our contract. These are the things they have to do. The decommissioning is going to be around, there's a 6-month mark, there's a 12-month mark. This one hasn't been totally determined. But in the end, if that facility sits there for 2 years and not being used and not sold, they have to take it apart and put it back to farmland. Did I answer them all?
I think so, but legitimate concerns.
Oh, yeah. A legitimate concern is that trustees and local leaders are being bought and paid and bribed. Not true. But they could be, right? Transparency is a legitimate concern. When are they going to tell you exactly what they are going to do? That takes a very long time. That's a legitimate concern. We've been accused of lack of transparency. We don't really know yet. We've been in it 18 months. We have no plans. So we can't really be transparent. But there's a reason for it. Of the long-term empirical study, some of the stuff Sarah talked about, we are interested in proving or disproving the impact on people. A couple of weeks ago, I hired my own chemical engineer to help me navigate through all of the kinds of things that I've been talking about with the sludge and the water and the air, and asked him, in this case he's a 40-year chemical engineer, asked him to help me. Maybe I'll ask you instead. Can our township work alongside a U of M and look at what's happening around these data centers to determine, is there an impact on humankind or not? That's a legitimate concern.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. Bob, thank you so much. This has been eye-opening, and I really appreciate, once again, you guys taking the time to travel all the way up here to share your experience. We will open it up if anybody in the audience has questions. Similar thing here. Just raise your hand, and as we can, Ashley will come around to you. We're just kind of fixing up the speaker here. I think we have some over that way.
I think I can give you two helpful things. One is when Switch came in, we knew that we needed to upgrade. So we've got better equipment, and we've asked Switch to purchase equipment that we don't have to keep in the building for when we need it. We did go to a ladder truck for a lot of reasons. We've been sending our fire department personnel to training because they're all very available. And in the case of Microsoft, we're asking them to purchase what we need to make that facility safe, and they'll pay for it. Yep.
She can ask a question. Go ahead. Of course.
You do for the recording.
I'll repeat it. Okay. It's okay. I'll repeat it.
So you mentioned that there were grants. Can you tell me what those grants were for the initial costs?
I don't know that you're going to need a grant now.
No, I'm just asking your question. You
When
mentioned 2 grants. I'd like to know what those are.
Well, when Switch came in, they were awarded a Renaissance Zone abatement.
Okay.
The state said, we'll make that up to you. That was called a pilot grant, I think. But beyond that, I don't know that much about that one. That was 10 years ago.
And then there was another one?
I'm talking about Perpetual Care Fund. Is that what you mean?
No, you named 2 grants and then you named the fund.
Oh. Yeah, those are the laws. 198 is what they said. I don't remember it in my head.
Okay, so, and then my other question is, so when they leave, it's a 20-year contract, correct? What is it?
A length of time on a contract for them to be in our community?
Yes.
Nope, we have the end of it. We have them, if they move out, they have a certain amount of time to sell it, repurpose it, or they decommission it. There's not a timeline on that. We don't know if it's 5 years or 20 years, right? Data centers are changing.
Well, it's a minimum 15-year contract, though, correct?
I don't remember that. Do you guys know this? I'm not familiar with a timeline. That's for the
Okay, so the question was about terms on contracts, but it seems to be there's some sort of various different elements to that, whether there's contracts with the utilities or with the township or, the transmission, et cetera. There's different players in the game, so to speak.
Before I was elected and then became elected, and this was the topic, I attended the policy conferences. What you're doing here today is extremely valuable. I went to the consumer's presentation to know, do they really have the power? Yes, they did. I went to a whole thing about water, and I learned a lot. I went to, did I say the policy conference and the consumers? And I went to a third one. I don't remember what it was called, but it was really helpful to get educated and find out what is true.
Excellent. I think we do have another question from the public back there. So the question was, is this going to be something that we put on again? Currently not a plan in place to do it a second time, although that certainly could be negotiated here. But we are going to be putting this up, the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance website, which actually, here's a great segue for all of you. We had a couple different maps, but here is our social media and our website for the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance. We are going to have this up on our website. That's why Up North Live 7 and 4 has been our media host today and is recording all of this. We're going to edit these down to make them so you're not watching a 2-hour video. We're going to have a couple of segments from the different panels that you've heard today. And then with each of those, if our presenters had any hyperlinks, notes, our guide from Dr. Mills, things like that will be listed on our website as well. That's going to be public. Anybody can see it. Anybody's welcome to take a look at it. We're also going to disseminate it as best we can to those in attendance today and to all of our 21 chamber partners to disseminate to their communities.
You can go to YouTube and do Quincy Data Center, Washington State, and you'll see Microsoft has been there for 20 years in a town that was nearly dead. And hear the testimonies of those people. Yes, Microsoft made it, but they used their local people to give their own testimonies on it. It was very informative. It takes some fears away.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, maybe two, depending on how long it is. I see one in the back there.
Good morning, and thank you again so much for being with us. Why did you go with a perpetual fund rather than a bond?
We didn't do it yet. The conversation is happening in my office right now, which one that we will do.
Oh, that was quick. Okay, I think we can get to our last question right there.
Thank you, Bob. You mentioned money was given to the township for fire protection. That was also during Sloan Township. Why fire protection? Is there a different type of fire that might go out of this data center or last longer? Lithium fire? Is that the problem? What is it about fire protection that you want to
I may need help with that, but one of the reasons is the enormous size of these buildings, for one. But go ahead.
If you want to hand him the mic.
Oh, you have something?
It has to do with the batteries that these data centers have and the different types of metals in the batteries. Once these batteries do catch fire, they don't go out. We're finding electric cars, when they catch on fire, the energy stored in them is going to continue until all that energy's out. The direction has been take the vehicle away from any exposures and just let it burn. And so in the data center, or you think about solar farms, someone's backyard solar panels, they may have a battery on that site, and if your fire departments aren't able to or trained to handle that, they come on scene and they have a fire they can't put out. It's pretty challenging. So that's why you need special training and equipment to handle this stuff.
Fantastic, thank you. And that's going to be it for our time here today. So Bob, thank you. If everyone give Bob a round of applause, and his wife for traveling all the way up here to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, this would be where I was going to remind you again that we are going to put all of this out on our website for all of you to see and review at your leisure. So if you want to take a photo of this or take a look at it, so you have our website and our social media quick at hand when we do. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get all of the resources from today kind of broken up into something that's a little bit easier to consume and review. But I want to thank Jay Sporting Goods, 7 and 4 Up North Live, and once again the Gaylord Chamber for making this happen. Thank you for all being here. In closing today, thank you for listening to this conversation. I will make sure that all of these resources from today's presentation are publicly available. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook or Instagram or here on our website, nmchamberalliance.com. We are proud to serve as your voice for Northern Michigan, and thank you for your time today.